That's not what theater.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on ideastream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Yeah, I would love to. See if there's a way. Maybe I can help.
How many years were you out there?
21. Wow. 55 to 76.
Hello and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dee Perry, host of WCPN 90.3 ideastream's Applause and Sound of Applause. And it's my pleasure to introduce today's forum, a panel discussion exploring the past, present, and future of theater in Cleveland. When you hear the words theater and Cleveland, your first thought is most likely Playhouse Square. Containing 9 theaters in a 1-block radius, it's the largest performing arts center in the country outside of New York City. What you may not know is that Playhouse Square represents just a fraction of the genre-bending, envelope-pushing theater present in Cleveland. This year, both the Cleveland Playhouse and Karamu House are celebrating their centennial anniversaries. They represent 100 years of creativity and performing arts each, helping our communities see and understand themselves in drama and narrative. Now, theater looks very different in 2016 than it did in 1916. Broadway breakout hits like Hamilton and socially conscious productions like those generated by Cleveland Public Theater are constantly redefining art, expression, and what it means to be human in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. Today, we've assembled a panel of local artistic leaders to help us discuss the evolution of theater in Cleveland and what we can expect in the next 100 years. Here today are, next to me, Raymond Bobgan, who's Executive Artistic Director at Cleveland Public Theater, Laura Kepley, Artistic Director at Cleveland Playhouse, Tony Sias, Executive Director of Karamu House, and Dorothy Silver, Actor, Director, and Cleveland Arts Prize recipient. Let's all get started. And where I want to start, Dorothy, is with you, because you have a direct connection to the Karamu legacy. You were interviewed, you and your late husband Reuben, as a couple by Russell and Rowena Jelliff in 1955, and Reuben got the position as artistic director for Karamu at that point. During that interview and afterwards, what sense did you get of the Jelliffs' vision for Karamu House?
I have total recall, so I'll try to condense it. They were a passionate and devoted couple to each other and to Karamu. They were there first thing in the morning, and they were there last thing at night, and they were fresh and bouncing the next morning as we walked in. They were totally committed to excellence in the arts. It wasn't about hobby, pleasure. It wasn't about, something to do after your job during the day. It was about a commitment that was immediately apparent and that demanded an equal commitment from the people who worked there. Those were the days, sorry, Tony, when they had one custodian who took care of everything. It was a marvelous privilege to be there with these people who became role models that were impossible to emulate because they were so specific and focused, and their life was about Karamu and the community it was serving.
Right. Yeah. But on the note of serving, you and Reuben served for the next 21 years, from 1955 to 1976. And I'm curious if your vision, if your mission took a branch off from where the Jelliffs were, or if you continued down the same road.
Well, they certainly set a standard with the emphasis on excellence, and they were very, very tolerant of the kind of explosion of creativity that happened in the African American arts. Our plays went from modest traditional plays, along with the occasional Shakespeare and so on, to plays that were being written by often very young African American playwrights who had a boundless need to express their feeling about the society we lived in. So plays became rough, you know, sometimes street language that was demanded by the society that was being described. And the jealous, who looked like they were descended from royalty, just took it all in. They were amazing people. They knew what Karamu was about. They knew what it was about in terms of encouraging artists and nurturing those needs for expression. So in a way, we continued along the same way, but history came along with us, fortunately.
I want to continue the Karamu conversation with Tony Sias, but I want to circle back around to Tony after we talk about Cleveland Playhouse, because it was born in the same year as Karamu in 1915. What was the vision of the Cleveland Playhouse founders, Laura?
Sure. Well, Cleveland Playhouse started at a time in Cleveland, which we all know was just bursting. The city was bursting with creativity and ideas. The population had increased 10 times over. And Cleveland was really starting to say, what kind of city do we want to be? And fortunately for all of us, those folks 100 years ago said that culture is what's going to make Cleveland a great city. And so that's why you have, you know, culture and conversation, I should say, because we obviously have we're here at the City Club. Right. That was founded in that same moment. The Cleveland Foundation, which was committed to supporting this great city. And then, of course, you have Cleveland Playhouse, Karamu, the Art Museum, the Cleveland Orchestra. So the founders of Cleveland Playhouse were called. They felt an obligation to serve this great community by creating great art. Mm-hmm. And so those founding ideals still run through Cleveland Playhouse today. You know, we're committed to artistry, we're committed to telling stories that matter, we're committed to nurturing artists and creating work that's substantial and entertaining. Sometimes we think substantial work can't be entertaining, or entertaining that they don't go together. But telling stories that matter has always been an important part of Cleveland Playhouse. And also in 1918, so 3 years after our founding, Cleveland Playhouse launched its first educational program. So throughout the whole 100 years, artistry, excellence on stage, and serving the community through our education programs to help young people grow and prosper has been part of our DNA and what we do.
Yeah. And it also makes me think, because of things that I've read about some of the founders of Cleveland Playhouse, that an art theater is what they had in
right.
mind. Experimental theater
sure.
of the kind that Cleveland Public Theater
right.
is now known
yes.
for. I wanted to move to that, Raymond, because James Levin had a certain vision for what kind of theater he wanted to bring to the Cleveland community, and I'm curious what your first connection with CPT was.
Oh, wow, my first connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had moved to Akron to study with a director there, and came up to Cleveland because that was the biggest city in the region, and encountered Cleveland Public Theater, and at first was a little, I have to say, a little skeptical, not because of the work they were doing, but because the vision of Cleveland Public Theater brought together very high art, great depth, but the sense that that depth cannot be in an ivory tower, that it has to be rooted 100% in the community. I mean, James Levin, I mean, what a visionary. He starts Cleveland Public Theater, started the Gordon Square Arts District, and the idea of that, started Ingenuity Fest, brought One World Fest together, and what a visionary. And he came into this neighborhood and said, you know, theater, it's awesome that we have theater downtown, and it's awesome that we have theater in many of our communities. There's no theater in this urban, dangerous, economically disadvantaged community. I mean, these theaters were formed at a time of incredible growth. Cleveland Public Theater was formed in response to the city falling apart, to the distance created between who lives in the inner city and who lives in the outer city. And this vision that theater can be the connector, that theater can connect all of us with the power of stories, but also can give voice to the voiceless, to the people who aren't in this room, who have never been to Playhouse Square, and to take their stories and put them on stage and give them voice. So just like with Cleveland Playhouse, the idea of education, and it's true for Karamu too, all of us, education is important. And for us, what's so important is that there is a seamless line between the work that we are doing and our partnership with the Metropolitan Housing Authority, working with children who live in public housing, that those same artists are the one creating the highest, most professional work on our stages. And that connection, that way that theater can help us as a community to speak to ourselves, that's the vision that James had and that we tried to live up to.
I'd say so. And that makes me think, Tony Sias, of your background before Karamu. Education was a huge part of the picture, working in the arts for Cleveland Municipal School District. But you were also connected with Karamu as an actor, director, as just a supporter. At what point did you say, I have to take another role, a leading role?
Well, in 1992, I came to Karamu for the first time. What brought me to Cleveland was I was finishing my MFA at Ohio University, and at that time, OU had a partnership with the Cleveland Playhouse. So I was a resident at the Playhouse for that 1 year and finished my MFA and then continued to work at the Playhouse, hither and thither. But I was invited to come to Karamu, and I heard about the institution by one of my friends in school, Dipankar Mukherjee, who had then been doing a residency at Karamu under Sarah May. So I had gone to the theater, and they were working on a production called The Hot Mikado. And a gentleman by the name of Mike Malone, a nationally recognized director, was doing the work at Karamu alone. And one actor was having trouble with his lines. And so they asked me to coach him on his lines. But what I experienced was this incredible community of artists, this institution that was, every room was full of activity, whether it was education programming, whether it was a rehearsal, whether it was a staged reading. And I must be honest, I had never seen African American and that many people of color in one space creating art. And so it was refreshing and breathtaking and exciting and important, and I knew that I needed to be a part of it. So when you talk about education, one part of my life I worked at Meredith Taylor, and I'd gone and asked Margaret, could I use the space to do an education piece? And Margaret had come in there and saw the work that was happening and began to talk about how important arts education was for not only Karamu, but for the city of Cleveland. And through that job and other instances, I spent 15 years at CMSD, and the last 4 of those years, artistic director at Cleveland School of the Arts. And one of the #1 things I've told young people about studying arts is this. I want you to master, I want you to explore, but use these skills and tools to be positive, contributing members of society. Because be an actor, be a director, but allow this to strengthen your social and emotional skills. And that's one of the number one things that I think that we have to have a new commitment to is arts education. And this is not just Cleveland. Our country has to make a new commitment, because without that, it's an imbalanced education.
And that's actually a perfect entree for where I want to go next, and just mix up the answers, because the elephant in the room, in the country, is that we are in a period when it seems like every day there's another act of unimaginable violence and inhumanity, and I want to have a discussion about what theater can do, what the arts can do to respond to that. Is it presenting escape? Is it presenting dialogue? Is it your view? And whoever speaks up first, I'll keep it going around after that.
Well,
Dorothy. Dorothy Silver.
Dorothy. I'm the oldest, I get to talk. I was fortunate enough to be in the Crucible, which Laura Kepley did a brilliant direction job of. And it was a thrilling experience. I knew the play well. I had not done it before. But the play, which will be done long after I stop talking, is a brilliant play about our society. Plays like this are not written every day. They weren't written every day when Miller wrote them. But it is a brilliant play that provides you with an average Joe who becomes a hero because of commitment, because of principle. And the play, which moved the audience, I know, every night, and I'm sure future productions will continue to do the same, is a play that answers the question that Dee has asked. It's a play that really points the way for the observer and the participant who delves so deeply into the material to understand motivation, commitment to society. I could go on forever with this. It's a significant play. And beyond that, the act of doing a play is also an answer to our society. Because I think when you're engaged in a project where the mutual goals are clear of excellence, the obstacles of diversity are overcome. And you learn empathy for other people, you understand them better in ways that in the normal society that we experience now happens very rarely, because we still are so isolated one from the other. So I vote both for getting into a play as quickly as you can and making sure that it's a play of significance that speaks to our societal needs.
Well said. And I'll just go down the line. Tony, you were mentioning a speech by Jesse Williams before we got on stage, and his words spoke to violence, spoke to inhumanities, spoke to many things that are just hard to wrap your mind around these days.
I think theater has a responsibility to convene people from all diverse walks of life to come and experience a play. That you may have opposing opinions, but it becomes the springboard for dialogue. It becomes a place where we can agree to disagree, and as well as a place to begin to have conversation around solutions. Because I think that there's always a next step after a play.
Right.
We have the experience, but how does that experience live with us? And how do we be very intentional about a next step? whether it's dialogue, whether it's a personal action, whether it's a newfound appreciation. And so we have to own that and do the difficult pieces that might, and I love the way you put it, said street language. I just would have said cussing. But street language is better. That has street language, and that confronts, and that makes you uncomfortable. But that in that, it creates the next level of awareness.
I want to have Laura and Raymond answer that question too, but another one that popped into my head as both you and Dorothy were speaking is that in those meaningful plays that you're talking about, the people who write them, the people who come to see them may be of the same community. How do you open up that experience of seeing a play, of writing a play, of experiencing that kind of theater to someone who doesn't necessarily find a home, doesn't feel at home in a theatrical setting? Mm-hmm. And you can either answer the first part of the question, Laura, or continue on.
Yeah. Well, towards the first part of the question, I think theater is the place that reminds us that we're human beings, because we're watching humanity play out in 3 dimensions. And theater, again, as Tony was saying, is a place where we can come together and look at the serious questions of our time. And theater is art, so it wraps those serious questions and issue in personal people, their lives, their story, their flesh and blood. And so that we make that empathetic leap and we care and we can see the multiplicity of the human experience, that we can see it from all angles. And I think theater can be an incredibly powerful tool to start conversations, to start actions, theater can reawaken our obligations that we have to each other. And you know, in light of so many recent events, next season at Cleveland Playhouse, we're opening with the Tony Award-winning play All the Way, which is about LBJ fighting to enact the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And there is a speech in the play at the funeral of James Chaney where David Dennis says, "I am sick and tired of going to funerals for black men who were killed by white men." And in that play, in that moment and in that play, he says, "Stand up, stand up, stand up." And that is, to me, going to be the most powerful moment in that play. And that if we do our jobs right in delivering that play, that at the end of the show, the audience will stand up and take action. Mm.
I'm really glad you asked the question about sort of who theater is for. And I think the room is at least half theater makers, maybe more. And I think for me, the lesson that we as theater makers have to learn over and over again is the potential for our own irrelevance. When 9/11 happened, as Mike Daisy so brilliantly talked about in his own performance, at 9/11 we learned that theater had failed America. Because when 9/11 happened, our audiences dropped significantly. Here we have the form that was founded by the same people who founded democracy itself, who said in order to have democracy, we must have this thing we're going to call theater, where we will come together as a community to struggle with issues of justice, with issues of do we go towards revenge, or is there another way? How can we move forward as a community? How do we deal with war? And yet when 9/11 happened, our houses were empty. This is a time where we cannot let that happen. And I think we need to think about not only who is in the house, but who is on that stage and who are telling those stories. two things at Cleveland Public Theater that really reminded me of this. One is the Teatro Público de Cleveland. We looked in our community, we saw a huge Latino community who were not telling their stories. We were all poor because we did not have the richness of their stories on our stages. And we simply opened the doors and gave them the tools, and suddenly they were not only on stage, they were in the house, they were coming to our other shows. Suddenly this whole route of communication happened, so that when we were doing Station Hope, some African Americans came to me and said, I never compared us following the North Star to freedom to the troubles of people crossing the border from Mexico. We have similar stories. And I think that's the power of theater. But as long as we continue to remain unchanged as a theater community by the events, if we do not change how and who we do what we do, then we cannot expect to be relevant. And I think the model of theater has changed dramatically in the last 30, 40 years. The entire idea of how theaters are organized is changing dramatically. And we need to be at the front of that as our community and look at who is making our plays and who is coming to our plays and who are we giving voice to.
Well said. And on that note, I think it may be time to open up the floor for questions. But first, Mr. Moulthrop has a few words to say.
Just a few. I promise, yeah. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are enjoying a Friday Forum panel conversation on the past, present, and future of theater in Cleveland, featuring Raymond Bobgan, Executive Artistic Director at Cleveland Public Theater, Laura Kepley, Artistic Director at Cleveland Playhouse, Tony Sias, Executive Director of Karamu House, and Dorothy Silver, who has done everything. It says it right here in my script. We're about to head into the Q&A, and we welcome questions, of course, from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, and those of you joining us via our radio broadcast and our webcast, or our new live simulcast at the Parma Snow branch of the Cuyahoga County Public Library. What's up, Parma? If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club, and our staff will work it into the program. Please make sure your questions are brief and to the point. Holding our microphones today, our Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky, and our Content Coordinator, Teddy Eisenberg. May we have our first question, please?
Good afternoon. I want to thank City Club for having this wonderful forum. I want to thank Tony Sias for the statement about the recommitment to arts education. Thank you so much for that. My question is, we have a serious problem with our young people and violence and gangs, and I know all of us in this room are so concerned about that. How do you see theater as having any kind of impact on that problem?
I would say all of us on this panel and the organizations that we represent and that we've worked for are deeply committed to education. And many also, indeed, many of our other theater maker friends in this room are as well. For us at Cleveland Playhouse, the work in our education programs, we have 9 different educational programs, but the 2 that I feel like are the most innovative are our CARE program, and CARE stands for Compassionate Arts Remaking Education. And this idea that arts have the power to strengthen young people and to use theater education skills, not necessarily because they're going to become actors and theater makers, but using theater education skills to help enrich the whole child and create 21st century citizens, giving them the communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity to address all of that. So we have, thanks to a $2 million grant from the United States Department of Education, Cleveland Playhouse has, under the direction of our Director of Education, Pamela Di Pasquale, is piloting and programming here in 7 different schools in Cleveland, a program that is speaking to social and emotional learning, using theater to not only enrich the whole child, but also the culture of the schools. Because if theater education can only go so far, if the children are suffering from poverty, if they're in a environment that doesn't feel safe. So both with our United Way program, our wraparound strategy, we are embedded in these 7 different schools and doing what we can to serve the critical need. And it's, the need is great. And I think we're all, doing what we can and hope to continue to do more.
Yeah, I think the research is really clear. What works in arts education? What is really transformative? What has time and again shown how children who live in more poverty-stricken neighborhoods than others, what is the kind of arts education programs that work to really have substantial change over time? Are long-term programs creating art. So really, what we've invested in over a long time right now, 17 years at Lakeview Terrace, a public housing estate, Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority, partnership that we've had for this long time to be there with the children, teaching arts over a long time, significant time in an after-school and summertime program. Also a program that really speaks to the idea about gang involvement, about youth violence, is our program called STEP, where we employ teenagers, mostly from low-income households. Last year, the median household income of these teens was $18,000 a year. And over the course of the summer, they wrote and produced their own play and performed it in 12 parks throughout the city. And what this does is not just impact these kids, but there is a repercussive effect. We know that when violence happens, there is a repercussive event. That the families are changed, the victims are changed, the neighborhood is changed. It's the same thing when an art event happens in a community or when a life is changed. There's that repercussion. Thankfully to the Cleveland Foundation, we're going to triple the size of our education programs, and we'll be serving 1,000 children by 2019. So we're really excited about that and that opportunity.
And at Karamu, we're redesigning programs and we'll be launching new arts education programs this fall. And what's been really important to us is that they are skill-based and sequential in instruction and mastery at the mastery level. Because I think once it is at the point of mastery level, then young people can benefit in all aspects of their lives by the skills that they learn in and through the arts.
Another question.
Thank you very much for the amazing contributions each of you are making to our cultural arts of the city. Thank you. But Dee, I'd like to go back to a question that you asked earlier about the audiences. It's been my experience, and I've been to all of your theaters, that the audiences are pretty homogenous. And so what are or can you do to really bring the theater out? So particularly people who live in poverty, the theater is not part of their cultural norm. And so the thought of going to the theater, and some of your tickets are pretty expensive, it's just not even a point of consideration. But last summer, I believe it was, I was in the Buckeye neighborhood, and there's a small park. And this park put on this production. They had dancers, classical dancers, and they had some dramatic presentations. And so there was a small intentional audience there. But then there were just people who were walking up and down the street who just stopped. And I suspect for many of them, it was the first time they'd seen anything in terms of a dramatic production or dance. So are you thinking about doing anything? If the audience won't come to you, can you bring your production to the people?
Exactly, and I think that's what I'm talking about when I talk about this model changing. That this last year, through a National Endowment for the Arts grant, an Our Town grant, we were able to expand this program we have called Station Hope. It happens in a neighborhood. They're very short performances. 150 artists came to perform from many different organizations. We were sort of a convener as much as an art creator. And these range from amateur students all the way up to the highest professional dance companies and performers in our community. And thinking about not just where do we bring our art, but how do we curate it? Is a 90-minute or 2-hour-long performance where we turn off our cell phone and we turn out the lights always the best way to interact with the community? Probably not. And so with this grant, we were actually to do several events throughout the community. We performed in CMHA housing to hundreds of people who came and saw stories that they connected to. People like them and people not like them. And I think that you've really hit on something so important, that theater has to get outside of our own walls and into the community and maybe change what we think of as theater as we do it.
And I wanted to engage Dorothy on that too, because Karamu, at the time that you and Ruben first started in the mid-50s through the up to 1976, that was also a turbulent time in the city and in the country. And I wondered if there was an approach that you had then that you see value for now in terms of engaging different audiences, engaging a whole community.
Well, I must respond. I'm delighted to hear the three panelists beside me talk about strategies for audiences and engagement. Because for us, I must say, it was primarily the act of doing the play. Now, the act of doing the play was considerable, because when we came to Karamu, and my recollection, I'm quite sure, is correct here, we were doing plays 6 nights a week. Kids would come in after the Monday off on Tuesday and say, "We haven't done a play forever." And we would run it for often 6 weeks. So the kind of involvement that was not just established by the act of doing the play, but the duration of the relationship was significant. But as I thought about this panel discussion today, I really realized I was getting older, because I am beginning to ask the question that I think older people ask, which is, what are we leaving our children and our grandchildren? And it obviously, strategic thinking about how you engage the community is a very important key. So I'm thrilled with you guys.
More questions from the audience?
My question kind of goes along the lines that everyone else is speaking about, which is engaging and growing for the next generation. So you all have talked about programs to engage students that usually aren't into the arts, or students that are going through the hurt of poverty, but just also kind of talk about what you're doing to engage those kids that maybe they're not in inner city Cleveland, but they're in those suburbs that they don't see theater in school. So, you know, the kids take music classes, they learn the recorder, they learn how to draw, but those kids don't act and they don't see theater, and so they're not growing up knowing about theater here in Cleveland. How do we get those kids who may strive and maybe our next actors and actresses and playwrights involved at an early age to grow that love within themselves?
Well, one of the number one things from the perspective of Karamu is a complete reintroduction of the institution to the community. And as we have had to navigate the most recent landscapes, I think it's also served as a vehicle to say the doors of the house are open and open for all. And I think, to your point, it's very important to have a diversity in zip codes. I like to look at it that way, because as I learn from you based on whatever lane I'm in, you learn from me, and it then allows for a whole kind of new mutual respect. And that's around race and ethnicity as well, in terms of this need for diversity and inclusion. So as we continue to launch our programs, we are looking to have a diverse group of teaching artists and students, lifelong learners, grown folks too, to come and to take our classes and to be engaged. Because one of the number one things is that, how do you engage the millennial population in a way that's relevant and significant, because they are the patrons of the future. So it's important from our lens is to say, what other forms of art and entertainment are relevant? How do you meet them where they are? And the voice of spoken word and poetry is very important, not only as a passive audience member, but how do you engage in the process? So it's really interesting, us trying to really take a deep dive and strategize further. How do you engage the millennial population, and how do you keep them engaged to invest into the institution?
I would say to answer your question, at Cleveland Playhouse, over the course of the year, over 30,000 students connect with us. And some of that is through the programs that I was talking about before, where Cleveland Playhouse theater artists are embedded in schools, in communities. All of those schools are at or below the poverty line. We also serve in two ways across the region. We have student matinees. And again, because we think that the work that's on our stages is absolutely relevant to no matter what your age. Of course, sometimes the content is more appropriate. But, for example, for All the Way next year, I mean, that is certainly a show that will be bringing in, and there's funding to bring students into that. But then we also, at those matinees, it's not just about seeing the shows, but there's workshops, small group workshops, both before and after, so that the students can engage with the ideas in the play and do a little bit of acting and theater making both before and after that experience. And then we also have another program called our Classroom Matinee, where we go out to the schools. And that's shows that we've commissioned and created that speak to the interests and issues in the schools that we hear from the students and from the educators. So we've commissioned a show about bullying that has gone out, and again, it's the show but also workshops. We've just commissioned another show about gun violence that will be going. So those are the ways that we try to serve broadly as well as in depth.
I think the other thing is just there is a multiplicity of institutions. I mean, one of the incredible things about Cleveland is the diversity we have of organizations, having, Dobama, having Ensemble, Convergence Continuum, Theater Ninjas. We have an incredibly rich community that goes well beyond, not only just these three theaters, but the professional theaters. We have so many community theaters. So I think there are a lot of opportunities out there for the community. It's not, no one can do everything, but we have an incredible network. It's really awesome.
I want to congratulate all of you for the wonderful outreach you're doing. It's very, very impressive. I have been an avid theater goer for at least 80 years. And the thing that draws me to theater is the complexity of the playwrights. When you look at plays done by Arthur Miller, August Wilson, they not only tell a story, they give the context of that story. And too many of the contemporary playwrights simply tell a story about dysfunctional families without bringing the context in. Can you tell me who are the rising playwrights that the theater will be able to depend on?
I'm glad you asked that question. So
I think, Tony and I are both really, really excited about Nicole Salter. Do you want to talk about what you're doing next year?
Yeah, well, we're doing a piece by Nicole Salter, Repairing a Nation. And I was introduced to the playwright at Cleveland Public Theater directing a show called In the Continuum by Nicole Salter, which my lovely wife, Kimberly Sias, was in. But in Nicole, Raymond them just did a production of a play entitled Between the Lines by Nicole as well. Lines in the Dust. Lines in the Dust. Once again, my lovely wife was in. So I'm a fan of Nicole's because my lovely wife likes her work. That's what's most important. But this particular show speaks to telling a family who around a holiday period, a young woman wants to deal with the issue of reparations in Tulsa, Oklahoma around the Black Wall Street. And so it's a whole conversation. So it's a historical issue set in a contemporary context that is broad and triggers a very rich conversation. So Nicole is one one playwright that I'm very excited about.
I wanted to ask Dorothy too, because you're constantly in something, and in plays by playwrights of the, if not the 21st century, at least late 20th. Is there someone whose work you said, "Oh my, that's amazing"?
I find all plays, have a tremendous level of excitement because you're exploring often a new world, really a new world. But I must say, it's probably my age, I am drawn to the marvelous plays of the past. I've done contemporary plays that I think are significant. Wings is one of them. That's a significant play about not just a person who has had a stroke, but how society regards that event and how the victim deals with it. I think it's a significant play, but I can't forget the plays of the past that always seem fresh to me, because unfortunately some of our problems never change, perhaps. And it is thrilling to revisit some of these plays, a la The Visit, and realize that indeed we must continue to work on this problem every day. And I am recalling, again, I think because of this occasion, some of the quotes of Rowena Jelliff, one of the two founders of Karamu. And when I heard her say to a State Department-sponsored group of people who came to see interracialism at work at Karamu, and when one of the people who led the visiting group said, "How wonderful, Mrs. Jelliff, you have your institution now. Everything is in place. Everything is perfect. Everything is, it's easy street from now on." And Mrs. Jelliff said in her very, very quotable manner, "My dear, you must fight that battle every day." So it's very interesting for me to go back to the past and resurrect plays that still speak to us. No question. Thank you for asking.
I would say that, in my ideal world, we would do a classic play, and then the next night we would do a brand new play, and then we do to have that going on, because new work is vital and essential to the theater, to our city, to our country, to the world. Having writers who can speak to the present moment. And many contemporary writers choose actually to speak to a moment in the past that illuminates where we are now. And I think those writers who can make it personal, provocative, and socially relevant, those are the great writers of today. People who I'm just always can't wait to read what they're writing next. Chiara Allegra Hudes, who we just had this past year at Cleveland Playhouse, Stephen Adley Girgis, and then we have so many great writers here in Cleveland who are doing significant, important, nationally recognized work. We have representatives of the Schmiedel family in the house today too, so I'm going to do a shout out to Eric Schmiedel, Eric Coble, George Brandt. I mean, these are people who are working here in our community right now.
And I wanted to say before Raymond says something that I have seen playwrights at Cleveland Public Theater whose names I do not remember, but I remember the impact of the play. They may not go on to a national stage, but they were local or regional playwrights whose work made me walk out of the theater saying, I'm not sure what I just saw, but I have to process it. I have to open my heart and soul to let some new ideas in, and I think that's so important.
Yeah, I think I totally agree about the classics, and especially it was so funny. We're all talking about Arthur Miller, who I just find so brilliant and deep. But it is our programming agenda to support new voices, new ways of making plays. That not all plays are going to be written in a room in one city and performed in another city 10 years later, but that some plays have to have a different kind of life. But we've produced 42 world premieres in Cleveland Public Theater in the last 10 years, and 35 of those were by local playwrights. And you're right, not all of those plays are destined or even meant to have a universal long-term life. But when they appear, they are live, and they are the community speaking to itself. And many of them are universal, and many of them have gone on. So I encourage you to look at the local playwrights, like the ones Laura was saying, and others.
We have time for another question.
So far, we've talked about a number of things, but there's an elephant in the house, and that's money. Running a theater costs a lot of money, and whether it's the groups that you each represent, or some of the others in Cleveland, like Dobama, or the Beck, or Great Lakes Theater, all the money problems have been publicized at one time or another, which leads me to my question. What efforts have there been, can there be, to coordinate the production so that you each are not maintaining staffs of carpenters, electricians, scene makers, storage facilities, and even places where you produce your plays?
Can I jump in? I'm going to jump in right here first, just to say, we're all jumping. We're all jumping. One of the things about all of us here on stage right now is that we make the theater. We produce the theater. We produce the work. So, there are other entities in town where the work comes in from somewhere else. But all of us are committed to producing it. So that means we are committed to those craftspeople, the technicians, the production staffs who are making the work, supporting it. And it's, as I said in the beginning, 100 years ago, this community cared deeply about culture and supporting. And I feel it every day at Cleveland Playhouse, how much support that this community has for the arts and how important it is to them. So at our organization, the price of a ticket covers half of the expense to make that production. And so half of our revenue is contributed. It's from individuals, it's from people, it's from foundations, it's from corporations, because we need that support. It's ticket sales. Again, you had mentioned the price of tickets, and we don't want the price of tickets to go up and up and up and be out of reach to the people who most desire and need and want to see the work. So I'm not exactly answering your question about coordination that's going on.
Yeah, I think there's something inherently in what you're saying. There's an assumption that I think you're making. And that is that theater people don't know how to run businesses. And I would just challenge that. And I would welcome you to come to CPT, shadow me for a week, see what my staff does, and see if you could do better with the limited resources we have. One of the biggest contributors to the theater of Cleveland are the artists themselves and are the staffs themselves. I'd like to see you walk to a lot of other big companies that seem to be working efficiently and see their staffs do what my staff accomplishes, and I'm sure it's true for all of us. So I think there's an assumption there that I would challenge, but I would put that challenge out there. I would love to get businesses into theaters because I think businesses have a lot to learn about efficiency that we could teach, and I think we have a lot to learn as well.
I think we have time for Tony to answer that question. And
well, what we're doing kind of on the ground, hands-on, we are partnering with Dobama Theater. And that I was so excited when Nathan Mata called me and says, hey, congratulations on your new job, let's talk. So they are currently leasing space at Karamu, and we will have our acting company and their acting company seeing each other, exchanging. But this is kind of laying the foundation for our authentic partnership. So we haven't said we're going to do this or that. No, let's get to know each other. So our first step has been an artist exchange program, that one of their designers is designing one of our shows, one of our designers is designing one of their shows, and Richard Morris happens to be designing Octoroons, which will then be at Dobama. So that's how we're talking about. Our other conversations have been exactly about how you share staff. So at some point, maybe it's an opportunity to say, we have one technical director or a group of various stage managers. There are no immediate answers now, but it really is talking about how do you get to know a partner. And I think quite often when you're going to share at that level, you then are sharing a lot of other things beyond a staff person. Is this a fit? And being authentic and developing that relationship so that you can really expand over a period of time. And so it goes back to your question about diverse audiences, that the majority of my audience looks like me, the majority of your audiences look like you. But when you begin to get these actors coming together and a conversation coming together, it's an opportunity to then have that exchange around audiences, around staff, and about our audiences being more reflective of our complete community.
Right.
We have just a couple of minutes left, but Laura, you look like you have something.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. That again, if we start thinking about that, we're bountiful and abundant, and that I think all of us, this idea of scarcity and we have to hold on. I think the more that we again are open in communication. And I have to say, I've been making theater in a lot of different cities across the country, and Cleveland is by far the most supportive, nurturing, theater town that I've experienced. I mean, I'm looking out at my friends from CBT, my friends from Dobama, Sarah May, incredible artists here today. And I think one of the ways too is that and I love what you're talking about, this partnership too, but how we get out there and that we're seeing each other's work, and we know what's going on, and we can celebrate, oh my gosh, the incredible things that are happening at Karamu, the incredible things that are happening at CPT, and know that it's not a competition among us, that we are all in this together to make this city great.
There are so many things I would still love to talk with you about, but it will probably have to be off of this stage because we're almost out of time. But thank you so much, Raymond Bobgan, Laura Kepley, Tony Sias, Dorothy Silver. Thank you for the great questions. And today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a Friday Forum panel discussion on the past, present, and future of theater in Cleveland. And today's forum is the Lucille D. and Robert Hayes Grease Forum on Cultural Arts, made possible by a generous endowment gift from Bob Grease and Ellen Grease Cole in memory of their parents. We welcome guests at tables hosted by Borderlight, Cleveland Playhouse, Cleveland Public Theater, and Karamu House, and we thank you all for your support. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And this forum is now adjourned.
Information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org. Production and distribution of City Club forums on ideastream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.